Yeah, 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 yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bottle Rocket. I'm Elena here with Maeve and Jerry, and today we're joined by Steve Simmons. Hi, Steve. Great to see you
Good.
again.
Nice to be here.
Steve, speaking of not nice, what did you make of the Tortorella walkout on the after his club had won that series? It seemed extraordinary to me, a real strange thing. What was how do you figure it?
Well, first of all, it's Tortorella. So you have to put like an asterisk with that because every year or two or three, he loses his brain. And this was one of those moments where, for whatever reason, he lost his brain, and never mind the excuses about having to catch a plane and all the rest of it. John just has a way of undoing all the good things John does by doing the stupid things John does. And I can understand that because I kind of do that myself sometimes. And then you do one of them and you're thinking, oh God, why did I do that? And in John's case, he's an engaging man. He's an intelligent man. He's a great hockey coach. He's a lot of things. But every once in a while, and you used to see it in those, back and forth with Larry Brooks, they just weren't necessary. This was really a dumb thing to do at that point in time, where the focus was already on Vegas for the Bruce Cassidy, enormity of that ridiculous situation. And so it looked bad on him. It looked bad on the Golden Knights. It looked bad on the NHL. And I don't believe, by the way, for a second that they're going to lose a second round pick. I believe that, Gary Bettman will change his ruling between now and the draft, and maybe he'll lose another pick, but I don't believe it'll be a second rounder.
Yeah, but there was a reason why he did it. One possibility was that he was angry over a penalty to his guy McNabb early in the game, and this is where he, without saying anything, that he was punishing everybody. But if I was a fan of his club, fan of Vegas, I would be deliriously happy that they won the series. Why in the world would the guy do this? I don't get it. I just don't get why he was harming his own team.
Well, you expect him, after all these years, after all the places he's been, after all the controversies he's been through and the times he's been fined and everything else, you expect more of John at this point of his life. And you expect him, something happened in junior hockey about 2 weeks ago where the coach of the Barrie Colts, they won their playoff series that they weren't supposed to win. And he came out and instead of answering questions, he just kept repeating the same thing over and over again. And one of his players was repeating the same thing. And it really looked moronic, frankly. And he got fined and the team got fined for it. And what happened? They wound up losing 4 straight in the next round. And it was like, the gods of the sport were paying attention to what was going on. In the case of Tortorella, it happened and they came out and won game 1, against Colorado. So good for them for that. But yeah, it was completely unnecessary. It was ridiculous. And I'm happy that the NHL, which doesn't always do the right thing when it comes to media relations. I think I've had a problem with many things they've done over the years. And to me, this was a situation where, they had to act, and they did, and they acted wisely, and good for the NHL for being quick on a response to really a ridiculous situation.
Do you think it's going to cost him his job? He's going to be fired at the end of the season?
Well, here's the thing. He only signed for the rest of this year. So, what Vegas is the most cutthroat operation in all of sport. They only care about one thing, and that's winning. Can we win? Can we win today? Can we win tomorrow? How do we get there? And so if they sign Tortorella for the rest of this season, it wasn't like we're expecting him to be here next year, or we think he's going to be here next year. I think we're going to look at it and see what's happening. It's worked out very nicely so far between coach and players. Like every coach, you have a shelf life. And in this case, maybe his shelf life is a touch shorter than usual, but I don't know if he'll be there next year or not. And I think we'll find out if they win the cup, for example, or if they play for the cup. I would suspect that he'll be back next year, and with a new deal, and probably not a very long one, knowing the way Vegas operates.
I agree.
So you weren't a big fan of the hiring in Toronto of the general manager?
Well, that's a multifaceted question. What happened is that they started a search to find a general manager to replace Brad Treliving, and names started coming out. And so what I do, or I presume what Stan does, or if you don't know someone real well, you start phoning and asking questions and making more calls. And I don't just do it with general managers. I do it with coaches. I do it with free agent signings. If I don't know a player, I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, the Leafs signed that big defenseman out of Dallas. I forget his name right now, Hackenpah, something like that. And I called a couple of coaches who I coached him, and they told me at the time that his knees are shot and he's never going to play again. Well, I asked the Leafs general manager the next day, how did you sign a guy whose knees are shot and he's never going to play again? He said, where'd you hear that from? Well, of course you can't tell him because, you're protecting your sources. So what happens is he came to camp, couldn't skate at all, couldn't move at all. I think he played 3 games just because they forced him into 3 games, but that's all he played. Now he's retired. And like the people told me, his knees were shot and he couldn't play anymore. So I started phoning and texting and sending emails to people in the game, general managers, coaches, scouts, player agents. What do you know about John Chayka? And what can you tell me about him? And I got to tell you, I've never, in any time I've ever done this before, received such a negative response. And in some cases, it was like vicious in the things that were being said by people. And Stan, you would know many of the names of the people I'm talking about. People who are very reasonable, and in some cases reserved, saying the most terrible things about someone I've ever heard said about someone. And one after the other. And then I started getting text messages and emails sent without me reaching out to people. So obviously people were hearing that I was asking questions, and other people were piping in and sending me. And I was getting calls from agents I got a story for you. I got to tell you this story, and go on like that. And I couldn't believe how negative it was. And I'm sitting here, and I had one person, and I can tell you who the guy was. It was a scout named Lindsey Hofford, who worked for John Chayka in Arizona. He's the only person who responded positively to the question I asked, but what do you think of John Chayka being the next general manager of the Leafs? And it was an incredible barrage. So I don't come up with this on my own. I come up with it by doing my reporting and asking the right questions. And all of a sudden you have a long list of things that are, really bad about this guy. And so when they named him general manager, I thought it was appropriate to ask how they could possibly name someone who is so badly thought of in the industry. And so that's what happened in the press conference. And did I word the question 95% the way I wanted to? Well, sometimes we don't. Sometimes I added a word or two I wish I had, could take back. But the question remains: how is it they chose him? And what did they learn about him that I wasn't able to learn from talking to many people in the game, many people who I've known for 30 or 40 years. And what was amazing is when I asked the question, and it exploded online as things tend to explode today, and it became everybody's talking point, for radio and television in the next, 24 hours, and some since then. You would not believe the responses I've received: text messages, telephone calls, just from all kinds of people in the game. And again, I was watching a playoff game on television, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and the general manager of the team who's playing that night, his name comes across my phone. I'm thinking, why is this guy calling me? They're on the ice right now. while his team's on the ice. And he's calling me to say, great question. In the middle of a Stanley Cup playoff game. This thing hit in so many different places to so many people, from players and ex-players and scouts and agents. And I have guys now saying, I have more stories for you. Well, I don't want any more stories. He has the job now. Let's see what he does now that he has it. But boy, I've never seen a reaction like this prior to a hiring. And frankly, you can blame me for this, the other part. I've never seen a reaction post to the question that was asked.
Well, like yourself, Steve, we all tried to figure out why the guy got the job. And with no genius on my part, I simply look at it as perverse nepotism of some kind. That's all I could think. Because you might as well have hired Mortimer Snerd for the job, and there would be 19 guys saying Mortimer shouldn't get the job, and the guy who carved him would say, yeah, he's good. I carved him good, didn't I? So it's as perplexing as Tortorella's not showing up in its own way.
Well, I will say, I will give him one piece of, I don't know if of not doubt, the opposite of doubt. When you're 25 or 26 years old, you've reached a certain point in your life, but it's not a point of your highest intelligence or your most maturity or anything else. So he becomes general manager of the Arizona Coyotes at 26, and he's gone by the time he's 30. And here we are, and he's almost 40. And I know that at 40, I was a lot smarter than I was at 30, or a lot smarter than I was at 25, and a lot more mature and a lot more balanced and a lot more, many things. And I'm going to give John Chayka the benefit of the doubt that 10 years later, he's smarter than he was, because there's no questioning his intelligence. What was questioning is how he went about his job, breaking rules and being suspended by the league and being fined for, losing draft picks for breaking the scouting rules. And, just a lot of stuff happened in Arizona in a pretty short time. None of it very good, except for one thing. Hired a coach named Rick Tocchet. That was a sound hiring on his part. So I will give him credit for the hiring of Rick Tocchet. After that, all bets are off. But I'm going to say, if any of us are, what we are at 25 and what we are at 30 and what we are at 40, and keep going, are different. Maybe he's different now than he was in Arizona.
So Berube got fired as well. You wrote that moving on from him was probably the right decision. Do you actually think this helps the Leafs moving forward?
Well, if you don't know who they're hiring, it's hard to say whether it's going to help them or not. And if you don't know what the roster is going to look like, it's also hard to say, how what the coach is going to do, or how he's going to, move on. Craig Berube's a fine human being. Craig Berube's one of the. I've covered a lot of coaches, a lot of years. Craig Berube's one of the best people I think I've been around over the years. He's very sure of himself. He knows what he's doing. He's a fine man. He was the wrong guy for this team this season, and everything he tried to do didn't work. And the one thing is, if you look at Austin Matthews, for example, being the best player on the Leafs, he scored less in the 2 years playing for Craig Berube than he did for anyone he played for before. So to me, that said either, the two don't mesh, or he can't make Matthews better, or whatever it is. But the Keith Pelley, when he was looking for a general manager, said he wanted someone who was data driven. He wanted someone who was statistically motivated. And so John Chayka background is analytics, and his background is data. And so he hired him. Now, if you go by data and analytics, the Leafs were just about the worst team in the NHL last year. So statistically, they were bad in almost every important way. So how could you possibly, great guy, nice person, terrific man, how could you possibly bring Craig Berube back when all of the data says you can't?
What's
The
your
backlash you got for your question, I always want to say that you don't ask those questions because you want to know. You ask those questions because we want to know. You are the conduit between the management and the fans. And somehow I can't understand how they don't understand that, and so it just behooves me that they are so have such little self-awareness of what your role actually is, in asking these questions. So,
There was a touch of controversy from some people, and certainly from people in the Leafs organization, that his wife was at the press conference and his kids were at the press conference. And how could you ask a question like that in front of his wife and his kids? And my first response to that is this isn't take your kids to work day. This is we're doing a job. We have a job to do. If you know going in that this event is possibly going to be contentious, you know what? Have a dinner afterwards. Have a reception afterwards. Bring your kids to the reception. Bring your family to the reception. But if this can turn into being contentious and you don't want to expose your family or your children to that, then someone should have said, no, this is not a good idea. And I'll give you an example of how I know they knew it was going to be contentious, because one of the people who was involved in the process and involved in putting this whole thing together walks into the press conference and turns to me and says, I just looked outside and the bomb squad's not here, so all is well. So if he's making a joke about the bomb squad not being there, he knows what's coming. Now, how did Keith Pelley and the rest of them not know what was coming?
I got a question in terms of sometimes you think the producers of Dumb and Dumber are involved with NHL teams. I look at the Vancouver team. How did Jimmy Rutherford, who once was esteemed, ruin that hockey club? And the coach that they named when they named him, what the hell are they doing? What do you think of the Vancouver scene?
Well, everything starts at the top with every team. And at the top of the Vancouver Canucks is the owner, Francesco Aquilini. And everybody I know who's worked in a position with the Vancouver Canucks who had to deal with ownership will tell you that's just about the worst ownership that they've dealt with in sport or in hockey. So if these guys have worked for this team and this team and this team, and then they went to work for the Canucks, it was like, get me out of here. Now, you know Jimmy Rutherford, and I know Jimmy Rutherford, and we've known him forever. He's a terrific guy. He's a wonderful guy for media to deal with. He's open. He's honest. He's just an impressive person. He's in the Hall of Fame. But for some reason, him and Aquilini got along great, from what I was told. And I don't know if Jimmy just, got to this stage of his career where he just wasn't any good at it anymore. But that turned into be a mess, and he had the huge dressing room problem with his two centers, and who am I going to keep and which one am I going to trade, and they paid all that money for Elias Pettersson, and he's turned out to be a bust, and almost everything that happened in the Jimmy years in Vancouver, other than having Rick Tocchet there for some period of time, which kind of brought some stability with good goaltending to the Canucks. Did they get proper return for Quinn Hughes? I don't think you ever get proper return when you trade a player of that quality. How do you ever replace that guy? How do you replace when you had a goalie who couldn't stay healthy, and your goalies can't make saves anymore? I mean, every single thing that could have gone wrong with the Vancouver Canucks did. which Jimmy was a part of. And, my favorite general manager line you get now, every time one of them gets fired or pushed out, I was responsible. Of course they're responsible. It's your job to be responsible. But that's a mess of a franchise now. It doesn't have much there other than the few pieces that they got from Minnesota, and I don't know how good they're going to be. We don't know who's going to be making the calls and the operation. I mean, Ryan Johnson's the GM. He was working with the Canucks through all of these bad circumstances, so I'm not sure that kind of a hire is the right hire. Other than I hear he's a great guy. The Sedin twins are wonderful hockey people of quality and we're brilliant on the ice. But do I have any idea whether they can, run an organization and be in charge of everything? It's much like the Matt Sundin hiring in Toronto. It was symbolic more than it was anything else. In the case of the Canucks, I honestly thought when Rutherford went there, I thought he did a great job in Pittsburgh. He did a great job in Carolina. Look at Carolina right now. They drafted Jacob Slavin. Well, in what, the 5th round or something? Many years. That was Jimmy Rutherford as GM making that pick. Same draft. The Leafs got Morgan Riley 5th overall. 12 years later, who's the better player? Well, there's no comparison. Jacob Slavin's the better player. So Jimmy's done some great work over the years, but he didn't do much of it or any of it with the Vancouver Canucks.
Like you say, I put the blame squarely on Francesco Aquilini because he's one of those owners that just can't keep his fingers out of the pie. He has to be tinkering all the time. And I'm a firm believer. And if you're an owner, you just let the hockey people run the hockey team. You sign the checks. That's your job. But he just can't help himself. He thinks he's a great hockey man, and yeah, that would be. There's talk of him selling the team now, and I would be dancing the jig if that happened because he has just been awful.
One of the best operations in hockey that I came across years ago were the Detroit Red Wings, when Mike Ilitch was the owner and Ken Holland was the general manager, and Jimmy Devellano was there, and Steve Yzerman was in the front office, and Pat Verbeek was one of their people, and they had a great, Jim Nill was there. They had a fantastic front office with all kinds of guys who've gone on to become, important GMs in other places. And Scotty Bowman, sorry to leave out the greatest coach of all time, but Scotty Bowman was there as well. How many operations in hockey today can you look at and say, look at the layers that the Red Wings had under, Mike Ilitch in those best years when Yzerman went from player to management and all that, and they won the cups with Bowman. Just a great operation. I love, even though they're nasty, I like the Vegas front office with George McPhee and Kelly McCrimmon. I think they're among the best operators in hockey, as are Colorado with Joe Sakic and McFarland. But there's a lot of teams that have GMs that you look at and say, how did he get that job? And why is he even there? And usually it comes down to who. It starts with the owner. How involved is he or not involved? Look at Edmonton right now. Edmonton's got Jeff Jackson as president and Stan Bowman as GM, and they don't have a coach. And, I don't know what kind of job Jeff Jackson's doing, but he's tied in because he was Connor McDavid's agent. And Stan is there from coming off the 3 Stanley Cups in Chicago. And he's done, I think, a pretty close to terrible job since he's been there. And you've got 2 of the 5 best players in the NHL, and they can't figure out how to win come playoff time or win when it, in the biggest series. And it's a nice place for a GM to be when you're that close to being a champion, but you better get it right. And so far, Stan Bowman and Jeff Jackson just haven't got it right. Maybe if they hire Bruce Cassidy, if that ever comes to be, that will be getting it right.
I've heard rumors they were trying to interview Berube. I don't know if it's true or not, but do you think Berube's style would click with McDavid and Draisaitl?
I don't see that. Berube's a dump and chase kind of coach, and they did interview him, and he's from Alberta, so that's like going home for him. I could see them bringing in Craig Berube as an assistant coach. I could see that, and I think Craig Berube would help a lot of staff as an assistant coach. But I think that style of hockey, it works if you have a certain team. That's a skill team. You know, their three best players are Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Evan Bouchard. Those are world-class talents. You know, dumping and chasing with those kind of players makes zero sense. You got to play off the rush. What you have to do there is complete your team, and they haven't been able to do that for whatever reason, being, you know, the wrong players on the third and fourth lines, or whatever, however you look at it. But if you look at champions and you go, and I always study things like this, if you look at champions and go back for so many years, the last several teams that won Stanley Cups had great third lines. And we don't always pay a lot of attention to the third line. Tampa, when they won, had that line with Yanni Gourde and I forget who the wingers, but that was a solid line. And then Florida won with Anton Lundell and Lesterainen and Marchand as their third line. And that was terrific. You know, won them, you know, 2/3 of that line won them 2 Stanley Cups, or were part of the 2 Stanley Cups. Marchand was only there for the second one. But that kind of thing, you know, you can go back, Stan, to the great Islanders teams, you know, the team that won the 4 cups in a row, you know, maybe the most underrated great team in NHL history. And they always had guys producing on those lines, be it Bob Bourne or Wayne Merrick or whoever it happened to be. But you need, because even watching Montreal now, the game-winning goal in Game 7, Round 1 and Round 2, Alex Newhook. Now, his name doesn't come up a whole lot. Third line guy, fourth line, depending on what team you're looking at. But when your guys at the top aren't scoring, you need your middle guys to contribute. And the teams that win cups get contributions from those middle guys. And this is what Edmonton hasn't had. You know, they haven't had enough after the big guys. And I think they need to fix that part of their roster.
Also,
they got to get a goal.
Goaltending is brutal.
Yeah, they're going nowhere without a goalie. And that trade for Skinner for Tristan Jarry, I mean, you're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You know, it's their unwillingness to find a top-notch goalie seems to me to be their Achilles heel.
Well, here's something that I've wondered about. Stan Bowman won 3 cups in Chicago. The first cup he won had maybe the worst Stanley Cup winning goalie I can come up with, Antti Niemi. Then he won 2 more with Corey Crawford, who's a middle of the road to top third kind of NHL goalie, not a great goalie. So maybe he doesn't regard goaltending the way that other people might regard it. Like his dad won cups in Detroit with Chris Osgood, who, you know, you can really get into an argument, you know, Hall of Famer or not. I'm on the not side, but, you know, he's not considered to me one of the great goalies of all time. So sometimes you can win without one, but Stan won 3 of them without really a star in goal. So maybe he doesn't respect the position the way he should respect the position. And then he makes the deal. Not only is the deal bad, Tristan Jarry for Skinner just 1-for-1 as player for player, but it gets even worse when Skinner's a free agent now, and they've got several years of Jarry left under contract at a bad deal. So they got a bad goalie and a bad deal, which they're probably going to have to buy. I think they're going to probably buy him out.
Guy I know on the inside said that particular deal, unfortunately, cost the coach his job, where it should have cost Bowman his job. So it's a total mess, in Edmonton. I got to say something about McDavid. Great, great, great. But what's his defense like? Where was he in the gold medal winning goal? He blew it completely. And there seems to be so much, he reminds you, 1946, one of the greatest baseball batters of all time was Ted Williams, and they go up against the Cardinals, overwhelming. And Williams was a nothing when he counted. And I see that with McDavid. I don't think McDavid's ever going to be on a cup-winning team, whether he winds up, wherever he winds up. I'm sure he's going to get the hell out of Edmonton as soon as he can.
I've known Connor McDavid since he was about 14. And I watched him in junior at Erie, and I've watched his entire career, and I know his family reasonably well. And I look at him differently. He wants to win. He really wants to win. Maybe his game doesn't always translate to exactly how it is that you need to win, but he does things that no one has ever been able to do before. We watched Gretzky, we watched Lemieux, and we've watched Ovechkin, and we've seen all these great offensive players. He brings another dimension to offense. And along with Leon Draisaitl, who's been a phenomenal playoff performer, you're talking about points per game in the playoffs. I think they're 3 and 4 all time. To me, that's a pretty good number. I hold him responsible. Yeah, I like what happened on the gold medal winning. I thought he was trying in the Olympics, frankly, to do too much by himself. And I think he felt pressure to try and do too much by himself, which was a mistake. When you have that kind of talent, you have to use the people you're with. But sometimes it took Steve Yzerman a long time to win a cup. It took Alex Ovechkin a long time to win a cup. This is what we're going to go into year number 12. Will it be for McDavid next year? That's what we're into, the long time now.
Do you think there is any possibility he might come to Toronto? His family is here, and there have been rumors that he might want to play for the Leafs.
Well, I'm going to go back to the draft because I was pretty involved with the lottery and reporting about it and asking questions. And at the time, what his family wanted, actually, and no one ever said this, but what they wanted to go to Buffalo. And the reason they wanted to go to Buffalo was because it was close to Toronto and close to where they live, but not the Toronto spotlight. And so they could get to the games easily, and they could watch their guy play, and they could, be where they had to be, but he wouldn't have the pressure he would have had going to Toronto. And as I got off the phone with one of his family members just the day before the lottery, and the last thing out of his mouth was anywhere but Edmonton. And so what happened? And you remember his face? Do you remember his face when he won the lot, Edmonton won the lottery? He looked like he was going to cry. Now, what's happened in the interim? He is since, like a lot of people, I moved west. I didn't know what Calgary was going to be. I wound up loving it. He's moved west. He loves Edmonton. He's married. He's got all his friends on the Oilers. They got a couple friends, everything. It's a great environment there. They're very happy there. And so after being, sort of shocked and stunned and going through I can't believe I'm going there. It's turned out great for him, except for the fact that they have no Stanley Cups on their resume, which, if you go team by team by team by team, a lot of teams don't have Stanley Cups on their resume in those past 12 years or longer than that. If you go back to the Oilers, it's 1990, the last one. So it's a long time, but I don't think McDavid is the problem. I really don't. And I saw somebody wrote something the other day, he's not a great captain. To me, I think captain is one of the most overrated things there is on any hockey team. I think every hockey team has leaders. They don't always wear C's on their jersey. I covered the Leafs when Matt Sundin was the captain and Gary Roberts was playing left wing. And Gary Roberts was far and away the leader of the Maple Leafs, even though Sundin had the C on his jersey. Sometimes I used to say a captain without a C. And we've seen it with many teams over the years, depending on, every team has that leadership group of 3 or 4 guys, and how good they are, I think, means a lot to what the team is or how they do, that kind of thing. But I don't always think that the C matters a whole lot, and whether Connor's the greatest captain of all time or not, or whether he gives great speeches between periods, or I don't see him being that kind of guy. But his talent is so extreme, and his playoff production historically has been so extreme that it's hard for me to sit here and say that they're never going to win something, because they got within 1 goal in Game 7 2 years ago with Stuart Skinner in goal. Imagine, if they had an actual goalie at the time, what might have happened.
Well, when you're talking about great captains, you have to say that the Leafs had 3 of the greatest captains who meant a difference, starting in 42 with Sil Apps, who stayed captain until he retired in 48. Two in a row when he came back from the Army. Then they went to Ted Kennedy when he was the captain in 49 and 51. A great captain. And then George Armstrong was the captain under Imlach when they won 4 cups in 7 years. So those were real captains when it mattered. I don't know about today. I think J.T. Muller as the captain of the Rangers is funnier than Looney Tunes, but that's the way it is. The Rangers are another Looney Tune team, like right now, like Vancouver. You don't know what the hell is going on there. Difference being that the owner of the team pays a lot of attention to his Knickerbockers, as well he should. And with the Rangers, whatever will be, will be. But I want to ask you, Steve, who do you think is going to pull an upset in this playoff thing? I like the Canadians as an upset team.
Yeah, I like the Canadians, but I have sort of this thing in the back of my head, and that is when a team is playing like a 7-game series and the other team is waiting and resting. Almost historically, from my experience, the team coming out of this series has the juice in the first game, and the team that's been sitting around does not. And I remember the 1986 Stanley Cup Finals. The Calgary Flames played St. Louis in a 7-game series and wound up playing Montreal 2 days later in the Stanley Cup Final. Well, Flames won Game 1, almost won Game 2, lost in overtime, never came close to winning another game after that. And I could see Carolina's a good team. Carolina is solid all the way through the lineup. Carolina is extraordinarily well coached by one of the 3 or 4 generational coaches there is in the NHL right now. And so I'm not going to at least and I love the young guys on the Habs. I think that 25, the defenseman is Quinn Hughes East. Like, he's fun to watch. And the line with Caulfield and Suzuki and Slavkovsky, that's those are great young players. And so they have that. Let's see when they get into a real battle with a real tested team, which, by the way, Carolina's never done any good in the conference finals. So them getting blown out last night is just sort of part of the way it works. But I'm not giving up on them just because of the history of a team coming out of a series for a team that's been sitting around and waiting.
What about Vegas winning it?
To me,
beating the Avs.
To me, it's Cale Makar. Cale Makar's top 3 players in the world. If I'm in charge of rating players in the world, when he plays, he changes the game. He changes the pace of the game. He changes everything about the game. He plays 30 minutes. So half of the game is played at his pace or his speed or whatever he wants it to be. Speed it up, slow it down, however Cale Makar feels like playing that shift. You remove someone like that, you can't replace them. The partner, Devin Taves, is a great partner. He's not a great first defenseman on a pairing. So it's a different kind of player. if Makar can't play, then Vegas is going to win, or it's going to be real close. I think if Makar can play at the level that we know he can play, I still like Colorado. I think they're deeper, and I think they have the better top. Much as I think Eichel's fantastic and Marner's fantastic, and Mark Stone, if he's playing, that's a great player that they're not, it's not healthy for Vegas. But Colorado has so much up front and so much talent, and so it's going to be. I think it's going to be a great series. But Makar to me is the X factor in all of it. If he doesn't play, I think Vegas will play for the cup again.
Vegas has the better coach.
I don't know about. I'm not certain of that. I think Jared Bednar's a pretty good NHL coach. He's had a nice run with Colorado. Tortorella's, been great and not so great, depending on what city he's in, and doing crazy things like he did the other day with the press conference. But he does have this team playing. They're playing for him, and they seem to like him, and he's letting them play. They play a hard game to play. It's not an easy game, the Vegas game, and you got to want to play that game. And they have a lot of depth, and they're doing it without Alex Pietrangelo, who to me is one of those, the kind of guys that win you Stanley Cups are those A defensemen who really, again, they control the pace of the game. Stan, we saw Denny Potvin, who did it as well as almost anyone who's ever played, do it. But you look at Alex Pietrangelo, he did it for a St. Louis championship team, and then he did it for a Vegas championship team. You remove him. Yeah, they've added in Rasmus Anderson, and they had Shea Theodore, and they added Hanifin. Kelly McCrimmon is a fantastic general manager. And he's, he does things no one else wanted to touch Carter Hart after the trial in London. Nobody wanted to touch him. And one of the people in Vegas told me upon signing him that within 2 months, this is before, the Olympics happened in ever. Within 2 months, he'll be the Olympic goalie. Well, it turns out he got hurt, and, they picked their goalies and everything went that way. So he wasn't even in the question for it. But here he is right now, and, brilliant in game one. And, you can turn your stomach and say, I wouldn't want him on my team.
No,
Vegas doesn't care. Can he help me win?
I
How the
say,
Golden Knights operate.
Steve, that Hart is the best goalie now playing. Better than the guy on. I don't like the guy on the Canes. I didn't like him in Toronto, and I think he's gonna be part of the Canes now. But Hart is one heck of a goalie, and you pointed out that, and I think he's the best of the bunch.
Well, if you look at it, Colorado's got two guys who were backups as recently as a year or two ago, and they've done a really nice job of splitting their playing time and getting good goaltending out of them.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. They're not. Neither of them are going to the. They're not going to the Hall of Fame. Jakub Dobish is a great story. I don't know how great a goalie he is. He seems like a wonderful guy, by the way. His post game interviews are
Awesome, yeah.
are become legendary. And you know what? You cheer for a guy like that because he seems to be so happy in what's going on and all he's doing. And from everything I'm hearing about the Canadians, they have a better goalie than him ready to come in, whenever that happens. And so, yeah, he probably won't even be a starter a year from now. And Freddie Anderson, God bless Freddie Anderson is a terrific guy and a big man and a good goalie who lets in historically the worst goal at the worst moment. And yeah, he's got his playoff stats are pretty good when you look at them big picture. But I can't tell you how many times when he played for the Leafs, they played Washington. They outplayed Washington the whole series. And I think he led in 3 bad ones that cost them games. They played Boston the year later, and every game's tight, and that it's a 2-1 game, and then somebody takes a shot from the goal line, and somehow it beats them, and now it's 3-1, and the game's over. Like Freddie's had a history of doing that. So yeah, he's talented and he's big, but he has a history of bad goals at bad times. So you might be right, Stan. I mean, this is our first time seeing Hart. When he came up with Philadelphia, people thought this guy's going to be a great goalie, and he kind of didn't do so great off the start. He had a little bit of a blip after a good beginning, and but now he's, again, what happens when you're a few years older and you've lived through the kind of crisis that he lived through and probably had to train your way. Like, I bet you he's never trained like this in his life, getting prepared for this season, considering what he was coming out of. And so, yeah, he might be, and I never even thought of that until you said it, but he might be the best of the four starting goalies left.
Well, the Canes had a 2-week break, so maybe that's something to do with that as well. But Anderson did look a bit shaky last night.
Well, I was shocked, to be honest, when they started him at the beginning of game 1, round 1. And I thought they might go to that guy Bussy, who had incredible numbers. He had, like, his one-loss record was really, really good. And so I thought, Freddie, the veteran, or the young guy with incredible numbers, they went for Freddie. And through 8 games, 4 games against Ottawa, 4 games in the next round, he barely let in any goals. I mean, I think he was like just over a goal a game is average. So he's had a phenomenal playoff until last night. And the key thing for him now is what happens now after last night, because, goalies have to have amnesia. You got to forget that last goal or that last game. The best guys always do, and they come back. And I think Dobish actually has this. His record after losing is incredible the next game. And, I think it's the same with pitchers in baseball. You lose, you want to come back the next game, and you want to be great. And it's just, goalies are the same way. They do not want to be the reason. They'll happy to be the reason you won, but they don't want to be the reason you lost.
Yeah, Anderson, Lena and I had this debate about the goalies left, and she picked Anderson and I picked Dobish, and just to me, like, Freddie has always faltered at the wrong time, or he gets injured. And this Bussy guy, yeah, he's had great numbers, but he's completely unproven in in NHL play. I mean, he's just a rookie. So, I that's the reason I don't ever pick the Canes to win, because of their goaltending, and it just, yeah, Freddie's, like you say, he may be a great guy, but he's not a clutch goalie. No, far from it.
But again, if you look at his playoff numbers, big picture, he's had a real good playoff run in his career. He's got 50-some starts, I think, and he's up there with, he just passed Jonathan Quick on the list of most playoff starts, and he's got, I think it's like 90 starts, and he's got 54 wins, and it's his numbers are pretty good. It's just the moment. So what do you remember? That goal that was scored in the last minute that never should have gone in, or that kind of thing. And Rod Brind'Amour is a great coach. He's a great coach who's never been blessed with a great goalie. He's never had a Brodeur or a Roy or Hasek or one of those kind of guys, Belfour, Fuhr. He's never had one of those, Vasilevsky. But so here's what you get into. You run your guy. This is what coaches like to do. Coaches like to not think of who's going to start the next game, because the old coach statement is, if I have to decide who my goalie is, it means I don't have one. You should know who your goalie is. That's the way it should work. So in the case of Freddie Anderson, he decided Freddie's my guy, and he went the first 8 games, and they won all 8, and they barely gave up much more than a goal a game against for those 8 games. And so now he gets blasted in game 1. Sometimes you'd say, okay, is it time to switch? No, you have to go back to the guy that you've trusted all the way through. And the hard part is this: Carolina plays game 2 at home. They need to win that game, and they can't afford not to win the game, and they can't afford for Freddie to not be solid. And so if they're down 2-0, I don't believe they're coming back going into Montreal, as crazy as things are in Montreal right now. I've lived through a lot of Montreal hockey over the years. This is the most insane crowds I've seen. Like the crowds are as loud and excited and than ever before. And I think, you know, the way social media now brings the crowds outside the buildings and into the other watching areas. It was never like this when they won. I was there in 93 when they won, and I was there in, you know, in 86 when they won. And it was nothing like this at all. And so I can understand you can't be down 2-0 and Caroline can't be down 2-0 and come back and win.
Well, let me tell you something. Anderson, if he was a baseball player of all time, his name would be Ralph Branca. Bobby Thompson. We'll never forgive him for that. You know, getting
By the
back
way,
to
I want to interrupt you for 1 second. There was a guy who covered hockey in and around New York who you know, and his name now escapes me. He was a freelancer for years and years and years. He wrote for all the websites and the wire services and everything else. Norm McLean was his name.
I know him well.
Yes.
Knew him well.
And I once referred to Bobby Thompson as in a column and spelled his name wrong. And every time he saw me for the rest of his career, he would remind me of, was it Thompson with a P or without? I can't remember now.
Thompson without a P.
Okay, so it's Thompson without a P. And that's what first thing he'd say to me every time he saw me. Thompson, no P.
Well, there was a Maple Leaf like that. Jimmy Thompson won cups in 47, 48, 49, and 51. And every once in a while, they'd misspell his name. But
it was a lot easier to misspell Mahavlich.
Mahavlich.
Or Borshevsky.
That's easy for me.
Yes.
Any
Neuendijk was another one. I hated typing Neuendijk. It never looked right.
So we spoke about the goalies. Do you think it's time for the Leafs to start goalie shopping and get rid of Stollarts? They got the first pick now. Do you think they should trade the first pick and get good goaltending, or what should they do?
Well, I think they should investigate what they can possibly do with the first pick if there are other options. And it's not that they don't like McKenna or I don't like McKenna, because I think everything I hear about him is terrific. But when your roster is as thin as their roster seems to be now, you have to look at every possibility. Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I move that pick and get 2 more picks? Can I switch it into something else? And so I think, you know, a guy like John Chayka, who is, you know, very analytical, he's going to look at every possibility there is and see where his team works best. Now, goaltending for them is funny because they have 2 guys who have played at times rather well. They have 2 AHL goalies who both look like they might be close to being NHL goalies. And one thing about the 2 guys who've played in the NHL for them, neither has been dependable. What does a coach want more than anything in a goalie? He wants a guy who I know is playing Tuesday night. And I know he's playing Thursday night. And I don't have to think about whether Joseph Woll is healthy or well enough to go. So he shows up for game 7 against Boston and says, oh, I can't go tonight. In Anthony Stolarz' case, his whole career basically has been injured. He's been injury prone. So you have 2 guys who really, I don't think either of them has ever started 40 games in a season. You have 2 guys who look to be NHL capable goalies, not great goalies, but capable goalies, equal to the guys who are in the playoffs right now, I think, talent-wise, but who've never been dependable. So who do I trust now? And what do I do? And do I want to have 2 guys that I can't trust either of them? Or maybe do I want to trade one of the 2 to see, you know, and bring in one of the kids from the AHL team so you won't lose one of them on waivers, for example, which would happen in the situation of Dennis Hildeby, who may not be the best goalie of the two AHL goalies. So they have a funny situation. They have 4 goaltenders, 2 veterans now who are either injury prone or not dependable. I mean, we don't know why Joseph Wall missed the first 2 months of last season. It was never told to us, so he missed 2 months of that time. Then Stolarz got hurt. Then they brought in a guy who wasn't ready right away to play every game, and it just turned out to be bad across the board. They have to someone there has to make a decision. This is the goalie we want. It might be Joseph Wall, but I'm not certain. This is the goalie we want. We're going to have to trade Stolarz because he's on a contract, and maybe we can get something rather small for him. I don't think you can get a lot for him.
Yeah, his value is down right now.
Yeah, I think, you know what? The way it's supply and demand all the time. If team really needs a goalie, they're going to give more than they are. Edmonton, for example, if they like Anthony Stolarz and decide that's a guy they want, they'll probably have to give up more than another team would give in the same circumstance. But management has to, and here's the thing: John Chayka's come in. We don't know who his goalie coach is. We don't know who the director of goaltending is. I know in the past who was in charge of, goalie, who their goalie coach was, and who they had a director of goaltending. But he's come in. It's his operation. Who's in what position? I can't tell you that. So I can't tell you what this guy might think of Wall or Stolarz or the other two minor league goalies. And so, it's easy to say, yeah, they're likely going to move somebody, but it's impossible to know who or what they're going to move without knowing who the people are that are going to make those decisions.
I wanted to ask you about Gavin McKenna, because I think he's overrated. I've watched Penn State a lot this year, and I think there's huge holes in his defensive game, and there was just way too many times that he was not even the best player on the ice, and he, to me, he's closer to Alexis Lafreniere than he is to Connor McDavid. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to go back to a guy that had supposed huge holes in his defensive game, and he became the greatest goal scorer I've ever seen. And his name is Mike Bossy. And people didn't want him out of the Quebec League because he was soft, and he wasn't good defensively, and he wasn't that good without the puck. And he goes and becomes, really, in my view, the greatest goal scorer that's ever played. Then at the Memorial Cup, I believe in 1984, I'm terrible with years, Mario Lemieux was at the Memorial Cup. Scouts do not like the way he's trying. They don't think he's trying hard enough. They don't think he's playing hard enough. Some of the people who had him rated first came away from that Memorial Cup thinking, maybe Mario Lemieux is not the guy we thought he was. Maybe Kirk Muller is the guy to pick first. I mean, you look at it now, Kirk Muller had a great career, but we're talking about a top 3 player of all time and Kirk Muller, top 300 of all time, maybe. And so you have to look at things from a perspective more than what you're seeing, I think. Now, remember this, 17 years old, playing college hockey against 20 and 21 and up to 25-year-olds. So you have to look and take that into perspective and see what exactly is he doing, and what can he do and what's he capable of. And I have scouts that I trust, and as I told you earlier, I always call people to get their views of who's this and who's that, because I want to get their opinion. And what I found, the scouts that I talked to, almost to a man, they told me he's not Celebrini, he's not Bedard, he's not Schaefer. Those are the last 3 number 1 picks. I hear better than Lafreniere, not as good as Bedard. So to me, that's a wide range for possibility. But I'm hearing that his offensive game and his ability to shoot the puck is top shelf. And so, I'm going to give him the Mike Bossy, not that he's going to score like Bossy, but I'm going to give him the Mike Bossy thought process on this, that, under the right circumstances, and the right circumstances for me, if you put him with Austin Matthews next season, and let's see what happens if he's ready to play. Let's see what happens that way. I think he's a good pick for the Leafs, considering how much talent that team requires right now.
I think Jerry's just upset that the Canucks didn't get the first pick. He's just jealous.
He's probably still mad that they got Dale Talon when they should have had Gilles Perreault.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been the curse, man. We have never moved up ever. We have only stayed the same or moved down.
And
Like,
this was
it's
the
just
year.
20
This was the year where it should have happened. I mean, that team
Yeah, I
really,
mean,
really needed a guy. Not,
I
to
mean,
be honest, at 3 they're going to get one too. And if you look
Yeah.
at, take a look at right now, Makar, what was he, fourth overall? What was Quinn Hughes, 8th overall?
fifth, I
There's
think,
a
or
lot of
seventh. Yeah,
really
something,
good
yeah.
players who have
Yeah.
come. Mitch Marner's leading the playoffs in scoring. I think he was 4th overall. There's a lot of good players come out. William Nylander, 9th, I think. A lot of good players
That's
come out of those.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it's a blessing in disguise because the Canucks need a stud defenseman, and the one they've never had. You know, Quinn Hughes was great, but he's not the Scott Stevens type. You know that they need. You know, I'm hoping that they'll get a really, really good defenseman.
When you find another Scott Stevens type, please let me know.
Yeah. Right. Joke time for Maeve.
Are we ready for the joke, or is it too soon?
No, we're ready for the joke.
Okay, I built
I
this
got-
one, the third fastest shrink joke, okay? Guy goes to the shrink examines him. He says to the guy, "You're crazy." Guy says, "Well, I want a second opinion." Doctor says, "Well, you're also ugly."
Thank you, Rodney.
See you guys.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Glad you enjoyed.
And to everyone watching or listening, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow Bottle Rocket. See you on the next one.
Yeah.